In the last video, I made it to Arras in France and went looking for a family member's grave and other missing family members' names mentioned on memorials. While I'm here in France and continue to learn about the First World War, there are more and more places I want to visit. My next stop will be the Somme.
Your destination is on the right.
July the 1st, 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, is often considered one of the bloodiest days in the history of the British Army, with approximately 57,000 British casualties, including over 19,000 deaths. The British launched a massive offensive on that day, with soldiers advancing across no man's land into heavy enemy fire. With a few exceptions, the attack is said to have been a failure, and the offensive developed into a series of major battles that ended with the onset of winter and exhaustion of troops in November 1916. My first stop is the Lochnagar Crater. This mine blast was the start of the Battle of the Somme on the 1st of July 1916. It's the largest man-made crater in this entire area on the Western Front. I'm interested to go in and see it. Also, the name of this, Lochnagar, this is a Scottish name. There's a hill or a mountain in the north of Scotland called Lochnagar. There's also a whisky distillery, and I was at that distillery just a few weeks ago, funnily enough. Before the start of the Battle of the Somme, both the Allies and the Central Powers had been engaged in tunnelling and mining activities beneath the trenches. The idea was to place large mines underneath enemy positions and detonate them to create significant disruptions in the enemy's defence lines. On the morning of July 1st, 1916, at 7:28 a.m, British engineers detonated a series of mines, including the one at Lochnagar. I'm just walking up the hill here, and the size of this is huge. Wow. The explosion created a massive crater, approximately 98 feet deep and 330 feet in diameter. It destroyed a substantial portion of the German dugouts, which are thought to have been full of German troops. To this day, it's the largest crater ever made by man in anger, and at the time, the explosion was the loudest man-made sound in history. Today, the Lochnagar Crater is preserved as a memorial by the Lochnagar Crater Foundation, who share the message of peace and reconciliation, and it's one of the most visited sites on the Western Front. Wow, the crater there is really, really huge, and as you walk around, there's lots of stories from survivors or stories about people who passed away here, and there was a huge number of lives lost on the 1st of July 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme. It's free to visit here, but there's a place that you can also make donations. I was reading online that there are 4 large memorials for the missing. One of them is here. One of them is in Arras, which I went to in the last video, and 2 of my relatives are listed there. And there's another one in Belgium, and then there's another one which I will write on the screen here. As I mentioned in the last video, the reason why these memorials exist is because there's no grave for these people. They were maybe unidentifiable, or there was nothing left, which was the case with my relatives. So let's go in and have a look. The Thiepval Memorial was designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens and unveiled in 1932. The date of the unveiling coincided with the 16th anniversary of the first day of the Battle of the Somme. The arch is approximately 45 metres high and has 16 massive stone panels on which the names of over 72,000 British and South African soldiers who died in the Somme battles and have no known grave are inscribed. The names are arranged by regiment and rank. It's the largest Commonwealth memorial in the world. It stands on the site of one of the most heavily defended German positions to be attacked on the first day of the battle, when Commonwealth casualties, killed, wounded or missing, numbered more than 60,000. Here we can see 72,000 servicemen of British and South African forces who have no known grave. Wow, died here in the Somme region between 1915 and 1918. As I walk towards it, it's absolutely huge. And I think it said on the plaque that the names are on the side, and if those are the names that I can see, there's just thousands. Well, down here people have put their relatives' names. Captain William Douglas from the Royal Scots, 29th of August 1916. So again, they're all so organised. We have here the numbers and letters so that you can identify easily the relatives. There's so many names. So many names. Here, like all the Commonwealth War cemeteries and memorials, so organised. The register, so in here are the books, so you can easily identify the name and the location inside the memorial. Inside this memorial, there's also some names of the different areas within the Somme where fighting or probably a large amount of deaths occurred. It also says up here, here are the recorded names of officers and men of the British armies who fell on the Somme battlefields July 1915 to February 1918, but to whom the fortune of war denied the known and honoured burial given to their comrades in death. When you look out from the memorial, there is a cemetery. On one side is Commonwealth gravestones, and then the other side is French gravestones. And the meaning of that is that these armies were united and fought together at the time. There's the team there behind doing work on the graves. They're replanting some bulbs and plants for the flowers in front of the graves. I've just parked up, and as I was driving here along the way, I passed quite a few British war cemeteries. You see the sign and then you can sometimes see the actual cemetery, and there was one that I passed that was on the right side of the road on a hill. There's so many graves, just all those are people who left home and never returned. It's so sad. And even as I've parked here, there's another cemetery. I don't know if you can see it there. There's one cemetery in the distance, a Commonwealth War Cemetery. They're quite easy to identify as all the graves are the same, and they're stone graves, square with a rounded top. Okay, let's go inside and have a look at the Ulster Memorial. Ulster's the name of one of the 4 provinces of Ireland. The Ulster Memorial Tower is a memorial dedicated to the 36th Ulster Division, who sustained 5,500 casualties on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. This memorial was also designed by architect Sir Edwin Lutyens, and is a tall stone tower with stepped levels and battlements, resembling a medieval Irish round tower. The memorial tower stands on ground that was captured by the 36th Ulster Division during the opening days of the Battle of the Somme. So just before I came here, I was in the town of Albert. In Albert there is a museum, and you can learn about the Battle of the Somme in that museum. However, online it says the museum is open, but it's not. It's closed until the 22nd of January. And then also online it says that this Ulster Memorial is open, but it's not. It's actually closed. So unfortunately, these places haven't updated their opening hours online, so it's quite disappointing to think that these places are going to be open and then you come here and they're not. But at least I can still see the memorial from the outside. I was really hoping to see what the trenches looked like. I thought that would be really interesting to see, quite fascinating to see. But that's what happens when you come in January. Before I drive a bit further in this area, I've decided to go into the cemeteries, the two cemeteries here beside the Ulster Memorial. This one is called the Connaught Cemetery. So it says on the front 1916 and 1918. The first thing I'm noticing is the number of graves for Irish soldiers. So immediately I can see soldiers from the Royal Irish Rifles and quite a few Irish surnames as well. I think I might have mentioned before in a previous video, but I'm actually half Irish. My mother is from Dublin, and when my grandfather heard that I was coming to France to visit the First World War graves, apparently he said to my mum, "Can Ruth please have a look for some Irish graves as well?" So I'm happy that I've been able to find some Irish graves here. The reason for that is because his father, so my great-grandfather, from Dublin, he had many friends and work colleagues who joined the First World War as Irish soldiers, and unfortunately very few of them returned. Most of them were killed in the First World War, and apparently the ones who did return, they weren't very celebrated, they weren't seen as heroes, because at that time there were quite a lot of tensions ongoing. People didn't respect the fact that they had been fighting for the British Army. Quite interesting to hear that story and learn more about that. Estimates suggest that around 200,000 men from Ireland served in the British Armed Forces during World War I. The motivations for joining the war were diverse. Some enlisted due to economic reasons, seeking employment and financial stability. Others were driven by a sense of duty, loyalty to the British Empire, or the influence of recruitment efforts. Additionally, there were those who joined for adventure, or as a response to peer or family pressure. The participation of Irish soldiers in World War I remains a complex and nuanced aspect of Irish history, intertwined with the political and social dynamics of the time. The post-war period saw Ireland undergo significant changes, with the Irish War of Independence between 1919 and 1921, leading to the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922. The decision of Irish men to serve in the British Armed Forces became a sensitive issue against the backdrop of these political developments. Many returning veterans faced challenges reintegrating into Irish society, with their service often overlooked or even stigmatised in the pursuit of a new national identity. Over the years, there has been a gradual re-evaluation of the experiences of Irish World War I veterans, and efforts have been made to recognise and commemorate their contributions. As you're driving around this area in France where the Western Front was, you'll see these green road signs. These are the Commonwealth cemeteries. So here's one, and then this is the path, and then it's up there. So as I was walking around that cemetery, I found many soldiers from other battalions towards the back. Something quite interesting also about that cemetery is that many of those graves are from 1916. Even though the soldier has a name and has been identified, some of them do have messages, but definitely not as many as the cemeteries from 1917 and 1918. So perhaps adding a message to the gravestone was something that became more commonplace towards the later years of the war. And I'm going to head up to this cemetery, and it looks like there's something quite interesting to see here. So the interesting thing about this cemetery is that it has gravestones that are lying flat. So I haven't seen this before in any of the other cemeteries. It's been snowing, so it's a little bit hard to read some of the names, but I'll check what year some of these are. So these are from 1916, these gravestones. I wonder why they were laid flat. At this gravestone, someone's left a metal poppy. That's a really nice idea. I wish I'd brought that, because obviously the flowers, they just die. As you can see, the rest of the cemetery has these gravestones which are upright. I also want to point out how incredibly organised these Commonwealth graves are. As you can see at the end of the row here, 11E, they're all labelled with a number and a letter, so you can find the name of the cemetery of your family member and then easily identify where is the grave, and you don't need to walk around because some of these cemeteries have thousands and thousands of graves in them. Every cemetery there is the plaque and it mentions about what happened here. There was the first battle of the Somme, and the cemetery started in 1917 for battlefield reburials, continued in use after the armistice, contains the graves of 1,304 British soldiers and sailors. I also need to mention about the Commonwealth Graves website. It is absolutely brilliant, and you can find your family members on there. You can get information about what cemetery they might be in. Even if you have very limited information, you can still apply many different filters of the information that you know. So for example, you can select First World War or Second World War. If you know the battalion that they were in, you can mention that, the last name, even just the initial of the first name, and then it will pull some results. It was because of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission website that I found out about my possible Canadian relative who's mentioned on the Canadian Memorial at Vimy Ridge. I also discovered another possible relative with my same last name. He was born in Edinburgh and died in the Somme. I think he might be a son of one of my great-great-grandfather's brothers. I'm going to try and visit the grave today while I'm in the Somme area. I couldn't visit it as it was closed when I was there, but if you're in the Somme area, I recommend visiting the Beaumont-Hamel Newfoundland Memorial. On July 1st, 1916, about 800 members of the Newfoundland Regiment attacked the German lines in Beaumont-Hamel. Over 700 of them lost their lives, got wounded, or went missing in the battle. In the Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador, the 1st of July is known as Memorial Day, in remembrance of the Newfoundland Regiment's losses at Beaumont-Hamel. I next headed to the cemetery where a possible relation who died in the Somme is buried. As I was driving here in the Somme area, there were a few very large cemeteries that I passed en route. It's just so shocking to see all those graves lined up. Every single one of them is a person who left home and never returned. It's just so heart-wrenching to see every time you drive past. I've now arrived at another cemetery where I believe another of my relatives is buried. So this is a relative that I didn't know about before, but have only identified by using the Commonwealth Graves website. And this isn't a close relative. This is going to be one of my great-great-grandfather's brother's sons. I'm going to try and find it now. So I found the grave here. This person was part of the Oxford and Bucks Light Infantry. Died 1916. A lot of people died on this same date in July 1916. What's interesting about this grave is there's no message, but there are messages on some of the other nearby ones. I wonder why a family would choose not to put a message. I think if I had an opportunity to put a message, I would definitely put one. For me personally, it's been a very successful trip to France. I've managed to see the grave and also the names on the memorial that I wanted to see. And I've also found out about two other relations of mine who lost their lives in the First World War. And I've found one of those names on war memorials and then also this grave here at a cemetery in the Somme area. Before coming here to France, I didn't really know what to expect, and the thing that has really impressed me the most is the upkeep and maintenance of these Commonwealth graves. It's absolutely incredible. There are so many graves, tens of thousands, so many cemeteries, and every single grave is taken care of. Even all the missing soldiers. All the gravestones are clean, you can read the writing, there's flowers planted, the grass is cut. There's records when you come in at every cemetery of the cemetery register. It's really incredible. I want to find out more about these Commonwealth graves and the maintenance and the upkeep of them. I'm going to head back to Arras now and try and find out more. Established in 1917 during World War I, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission is an organisation responsible for commemorating and maintaining the graves and memorials of Commonwealth military personnel who died in the two world wars. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission commemorates 1.7 million casualties worldwide, all remembered by name. It's funded by grants from the 6 member states, with each country's contribution proportionate to the number of graves maintained on its behalf. The UK contributes around 78%, with Canada second at around 10%. I paid a visit to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission Visitor Centre in Arras and met with Marlene.
Blue Point is a cemetery, so this is the location of our cemeteries in northern France and Normandy.
Wow, there's so many, especially on the eastern side of France into Belgium.
This is the front line during the First World War, and these are the cemeteries of the liberation of Normandy.
Okay.
For the Second World War. So this is the map of the world where we maintain about 23,000 cemeteries and memorials in about 150 countries.
Wow.
So for each country, you have the number of soldiers commemorated in this country. The soldiers who are buried or commemorated in the country.
And which country has the most?
The France.
Oh yeah?
Yes.
What number is France?
It's 575,000
so many
soldiers, yes.
I then did the excellent audio tour to learn more. So behind me here is the headstone production area, and there's a machine that's engraving the headstones, which is really amazing. So here are all the different shapes of headstones. There's 30 different types of headstone, depending on the role of the casualty, the nationality, when they died and where they're buried. It mentioned on the audio guide that sometimes the headstones are different shapes due to the conditions of the country of burial. They might be more prone to flooding or earthquakes. So out here in the courtyard, I've got this audio guide that I'm listening to. So at the headstone production area, there's some really interesting information that I learned. So one headstone is 80 kilos. And when I visited the cemeteries, I mentioned about some of them not having a message. And at the beginning of the First World War, there was a fee to put a personalised message on the headstone. So some of the families who were poorer didn't have the opportunity to put a message for that reason, but that was changed. And also, no New Zealand soldiers have any message on their headstones. So that's really interesting to learn, actually. Okay, I'll move on to number 2. At number 2 here is the carpenter's workshop. I didn't even realise, but all the gates and the doors in all the cemeteries are made here. A lot of the work is restoration, and if the door is beyond repair, what they're doing is replicating it using the original techniques and in the same style as much as possible, which is incredible. Here are some of the different regiment badges. There's around 1,100 badges. And then here are the different types of stone that's used to make the headstones. Over here are some examples of the different doors and gates that are found in the cemeteries. And on the audio guide, it mentioned that every 5 years, a cemetery gets an inspection and they check for any damage and if anything needs to be replaced. Here at number 3 is the mechanic's workshop. In here is where they maintain and take care of all the lawnmowers. Because the cemeteries are all different, some of them are very large with big entrances, some of them are very small. A lot of different types of lawnmowers are required. Number 4 here is the tool store, and you can see all the different tools that they use to maintain gardens all throughout the world. And here are the changes that have been made between 1920 and today, the different tools that are made. The gardening section was really interesting because there's so many things to consider when you have cemeteries all over the world. It mentioned that some cemeteries in India have snakes, and there was also a cemetery in Kenya that had an elephant enter inside and cause quite a lot of damage. And then in Asia, there's the issue with wild boar. So the gardeners in each location have to be aware and work with these challenges that they face. I've come in now to the room called Recovery and Reburial. So I'm going to have a look around here, and it looks like there are some badges and boots and uniform items to see inside this room. Here is a hat that would have belonged to a British soldier that was found, and then also some buttons. It feels quite emotional to see these because 2 of my family members went missing and they would have worn hats and had buttons like this. Here's also some personal items that have been found. These forks and combs and a razor. It mentions here that on the cutlery they could sometimes identify even the town, the hometown of where the cutlery was bought. Here's also a whistle, so if the casualty had a whistle, it usually suggests that they were an officer. They would blow the whistle to signal the start of an attack. Here's the boots that a British soldier would have worn. It mentions here that Australian boots were more comfortable and sometimes the soldiers swapped boots. Here are also some badges that have been found, and one of them is the regiment, King's Own Scottish Borderers. That was the regiment of my 2 family members who went missing. Imagine if that badge belonged to one of them. Here are the water canteens that the soldiers would have used. The one on the left would have been a British one, and then the rounded one is a German water canteen. It mentions as well here that if they can identify the soldier, they will make the headstone with the name, but sometimes it's not possible to identify the soldier. This here is a small coffin that historically was used for partial remains, but these days a full coffin is always used. Sometimes farmers are ploughing the fields and they'll come across things, and then the team from here will go out and do some more investigating. The Commonwealth Graves and Memorials are designed to be uniform, reflecting the principle of equality in death. The Commission continues its work today, caring for existing sites and responding to the discovery of previously unknown graves. On average, there are 40 new discoveries of World War remains every year. So in here, they have all the road signs. There's a whole department for this as well. And these road signs are shipped all over the world. They're made from aluminium, and in some places they're vandalized, even stolen and sold because aluminium is quite valuable. Here's the workshop for the road signs. On the walls at the back you can see some of the original road signs which were manufactured in England and hand painted. Here's some different conditions of headstones. So on the left that is a deteriorated headstone, and then the different ones, and then on the right that's a new headstone. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission plays a crucial role in preserving the memory of those who served and died in the 2 world wars, providing a lasting tribute to their sacrifice. Number 9 here is the metal, forge and metal work. So in here they make gates, handles, hinges. It's incredible. Wow, there's a gate there. It's absolutely amazing. I've just finished my tour inside the Commonwealth Graves Commission here on the outskirts of Arras, and it was an incredible experience to do that tour and learn about the scale of work that is being done around the world. To be honest, I had no idea about it, and I'm so glad that I now know, especially since they're taking care of one of the graves and the memorial of 3 of my family members. Inside you can learn so much about all the different departments, the headstones, the woodworking, the gardening, the recovery, the metalwork, the road signs. There is so much work that goes into maintaining these graves. So many countries, so many cemeteries and so many graves. It was really quite emotional going into that room and learning about how they recover the bodies and seeing the hats and the boots, and also seeing the badge of the regiment of my 2 missing family members. It was really quite emotional. If you're in this area, you must come and visit here. It's free to come and do that audio tour. They opened it in 2019 and definitely recommend it. To be honest, I don't remember learning that much about the First World War when I was younger. Coming to France has made me realise there's a lot that I don't know. Visiting these First World War sites in real life that I've only ever heard about or seen in videos has had a much bigger impact on me than I could ever have imagined. Join me next time in my 3rd and final film exploring more about the First World War. My next stop is Belgium.